Hi, my name is Henry Jensen, and welcome to my Economics 221 final report on mitigating the externality of marine plastic waste. I conducted this project because I felt that marine plastic waste is a significant problem and will continue to be a significant problem in the future. I wanted to delve down into the nuance of how it affects our society and how it can be effectively addressed. To properly be introduced to this project, you must also be introduced to how damaging plastic is to both our environment and economy. The growing amount of plastic in our oceans is an increasingly concerning problem, calling for a rapid response. As the human population rises, our use of plastic continues to grow. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development reported that worldwide plastic consumption has quadrupled from 1992 to 2022. Plastic is a useful, cheap, and durable material. However, manufacturing it does not come without negative externalities. Plastic is extremely hard to break down naturally, and we often fail to effectively mitigate its waste. The OECD moves on to assert that the world produces twice as much plastic waste as it did 2 decades ago, and with only 9% being recycled, most ends up polluting the environment. Plastic accumulation in the ocean calls for particular concern. Ocean waste is likely the most significant negative externality resulting from the plastic production process. A joint report from multiple Australian universities estimated the overall socio-economic cost to be over 2.2 trillion US dollars per year. Evidently, ocean waste results in a significant economic cost to society, and a more effective solution can and should be implemented. Proposed ideas include forcing manufacturers to mitigate and remove ocean waste through either private means or nonprofits, convincing consumers to use less plastic through educating them, or taxing manufacturers relative to the amount of plastic they produce. When I considered the standard economic theory and backed it up with real-world data, it became apparent that the most effective solution would be for governments to mandate a tax on manufacturers relative to the amount of plastic they manufacture, and then use the collections to fund a government-managed, cohesive ocean cleanup program. Under standard economic assumptions, this tax would force manufacturers to internalize their negative externality in a very fair and very scalable manner. It would significantly reduce consumer demand and provide us with sufficient funds for cleanup efforts, broadly minimizing the $2.2 trillion consequences of plastic ocean waste in the most fair and efficient way possible. Regarding the methodology of the project, we used a combination of both real-world evidence and an analysis of a modern economic model. We determined that the need to mitigate the externality of marine plastic waste was validated. To determine the most effective method of mitigating ocean plastic waste, proposed solutions to mitigate the negative externality were evaluated with the support of real-world research and data, and then contrasted against the standard economic model. It was assumed that consumers would make rational decisions and that all groups would seek to minimize cost through rational decision-making. Potential strategies were evaluated with reputable real-world data, and then compared against one another to find the solution that, under the rational assumption of the standard economic model, most effectively internalizes the externality, reduces plastic consumption, and funds marine plastic cleanup efforts, addressing all aspects of the externality while not disproportionately burdening uninvolved groups. When going over the data and findings for this project, we have to note that it is in our economic interest to minimize the externality of plastic ocean pollution. The gross value of the ocean is projected to grow to up to $3 trillion per year by 2030. However, the economic viability of the ocean is under significant threat from plastic pollution. The Environmental Protection Agency even goes to assert that the quality of our ocean is degrading significantly, with marine plastic waste being one of the most primary causes. When evaluating the Sustainable Development Goals set aside by the UN, researchers estimated that it would take around $175 million to adequately fund cleanup efforts, ensuring the ocean stays economically viable. It's noteworthy that this is a significantly lower price than the trillions of dollars the ocean contributes to the economy per year. Furthermore, we should prioritize mitigating marine plastic waste without significant regard to the global plastic market. The trillions in economic value of a viable ocean are much more significant than the value of the global plastic market, which Grand Canyon research estimated to be worth around $593 billion. Under the standard economic model, we are forced to make decisions, and we should prioritize the more economically valuable option of conserving our ocean. Evidently, we should work to secure a stable ocean through mitigating plastic consumption and funding ocean cleanup efforts in the most economically effective way possible. When researching how to effectively mitigate plastic consumption, it was found that government-mandated taxes on plastic products proved to be remarkably effective in curbing consumer demand. A 15-cent Euro tax levied on plastic bags in Ireland in 2002 reduced plastic bag usage by 90% and caused a similar reduction in usage of littering. If a standard economic assumption is assumed, a direct tax on plastic manufacturing would fall on the consumer to a very significant degree and would be uniquely impactful in curbing consumer demand. The tax would theoretically cause an immediate rise in plastic prices for consumers due to taxes falling on both producer and consumer under the standard economic model. Consequentially, the profits of manufacturers in proportion to the volume of plastic produced would be reduced. When governments try to educate consumers on the socioeconomic dangers of ocean plastic without actually taxing or restricting plastic production, they often fail to effectively reduce plastic consumption or ocean waste to any noteworthy degree. Governments worldwide have tried to convince consumers to reduce their use of single-use plastic products for decades. However, education alone seemed to have little quantifiable impact. Information on the danger of maritime plastic waste is more available and widespread than ever, but the consumption of worldwide plastic has grown exponentially each year since 1970, according to the United Nations. This data also correlates with the principles of the standard economic model, asserting that consumers are attracted to the most cost-effective option, not necessarily the most environmentally friendly one. Evidently, if we want consumers to pursue the most economically effective option in the long run, we need to consider that education programs alone are generally ineffective in mitigating plastic consumption, and as a result, the negative externality of marine plastic waste as a whole. When researching how to properly fund cleanup efforts, it became clear that a direct tax would theoretically curb future plastic production, but it is unique in the way it could also be leveraged to effectively address the externality of the plastic waste already in our waters. An in-depth evaluation conducted by Grandview Research concluded that the plastic market is worth a substantial $593 billion, but little revenue is formally contributed towards managing any sort of plastic pollution, the main externality of plastic manufacturing, specifically maritime ocean pollution. If just a fraction of the funds were used to fuel a government cleanup effort, under standard economic assumptions, governments could be supplied with a proportionate, substantial, and scalable amount of money to mitigate the externality. When you evaluate the strategy through a modern economic model, a direct tax appears to be highly capable of supplying sufficient funds. Collections from a direct tax on manufacturing would effectively and quickly scale with the amount of plastic being manufactured, helping to ensure that governments receive adequate funds for cleanup efforts in a uniquely responsive manner. If firms were pushed to pursue private or nonprofit solutions to ocean waste, several significant problems would arise when considering the standard economic model. A command and control policy based on private solutions under standard economic assumptions would still seek to maximize profit through trade-offs and would likely be inclined to minimize costs, even if a cheaper cleanup effort would be less effective. Furthermore, many standard plastic manufacturing firms are very unlikely to have adequate resources for an advanced cohesive ocean cleanup, with a leading nonprofit ocean cleanup organization publicly stating they will require around 10 full-size rigs in constant operation to properly curb the growing amount of ocean plastic. Requiring advanced fueling, transport, and waste disposal, the legal and economic resources to properly and supply and facilitate a large-scale marine plastic cleanup would be out of reach for most plastic manufacturing firms and ocean cleanup nonprofits. Therefore, if we want to choose the option that is most in line with economies of scale, we should certainly go with the pooled, group-funded, taxed, government-operated cleanup model. When evaluating the results, we found other methods of reducing plastic consumption, and therefore marine plastic waste, fell short when the wide-ranging effectiveness of a direct tax was considered through the standard economic model. The data showed that a direct tax on plastic would be far more effective in curbing plastic consumption than the proposed idea of merely trying to educate consumers on the dangers of plastic production and ocean waste. Governments have consistently attempted to convince consumers to use less plastic for years, citing environmental reasons with little success. Under standard assumptions, consumers will make rational decisions and consume less plastic if the price of plastic is higher, but not necessarily if they are merely told it is bad for the environment. When considering the standard economic model, cleanup efforts would be most efficiently run by governments, rather than privately by companies or nonprofits. Mandating companies to clean marine plastic themselves is a complicated, inaccurate, and unrealistic way to address the externality. A large-scale and cohesive operation is crucial to truly internalizing the externality in the most fair and efficient way possible. Realistically, most firms do not have the capacity to address their share of the issue independently, and a regulating government with the ability to pool resources from various manufacturers could mandate a far more large-scale and efficient operation. Concluding the project, the goal of this report was to use real-world data combined with the standard economic model to evaluate popular theories on the most effective way to mitigate marine plastic. The analysis concluded that ocean plastic is a significant socioeconomic problem that should be addressed a lot more deliberately, and that the most effective strategy to mitigate ocean plastic, according to the given methodology, is a direct tax on plastic manufacturing, with the revenue being directly used to fund a large-scale government-run cleanup program. This project implies that governments should ensure manufacturers financially compensate for the significant negative externality of their ocean plastic, and that compensation can be effectively paid through taxation. While strongly researched, this project does have flaws and is limited in the lack of real-world data regarding a direct tax on plastic manufacturing that is used solely to fund cleanup efforts. Furthermore, there is not significant research on the economic impacts of lower plastic consumption worldwide. However, the determined ideal theory remains highly compatible with the principles of the standard economic model. Please note my references. Thank you for taking the time to hear my project. Sincerely, Henry Jensen, Orfila College of Business.